Ask me to recommend you an electric car, and I'm probably going to tell you to buy a Tesla Model 3. Until now. I just picked up the keys to the BYD Seal, and what you're looking at is one of the strongest alternatives to buying a Tesla Model 3, and let me explain why. Now before you watch this review, make sure you visit productreview.com.au because there you're going to be able to read actual owners who have bought and live with a BYD, and you're going to be able to make sure if the BYD is right for you by reading how other people have found it. Now if you live in any major city now, you've probably seen these driving around, unless you live in North America, because BYD is taking the world a bit by storm because it's one of the largest manufacturers of electric cars in the world, even overtaking Tesla recently. Now BYD stands for Build Your Dreams, but it doesn't really because it actually stands for something else, but to make it easier for Western consumers, that's what it means. Now the Seal is a ground up EV from BYD, and this thing has a maritime themed name in keeping with the other models that BYD makes, like the Dolphin, which I just reviewed. Now this thing has 3 different models to choose from here in Australia: a $48,000 base model, this middle ground $58,000 model, and a top end performance model, which is $68,000. Now this middle ground is meant to be one of the more popular options because it gives you the nicer features and it gives you a bit more performance and range because it has the larger battery, and you don't really need all that power in the performance model unless you want to go from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 3.8 seconds and one all-wheel drive. And so that means the base and the premium are both rear-motored, rear-wheel drive EVs. Now the next most popular question aside from price is how far can this travel on a single charge? Well, this is carrying the larger 82 kilowatt hour battery, which means you can travel up to 560 kilometers on a single charge according to the WLTP cycle. But according to evdatabase.org, the lowest range you can expect from this is 355 kilometers when you're traveling at highway speeds in cold climates, but you can expect up to nearly 690 kilometers of range when you're driving around the city in mild climate conditions. And this thing is really quite efficient, as we'll find out when we're driving. Now, one of the limiting factors of this larger EV is its charge rate. It can only charge up to 150 kilowatts at a fast charger, meaning it'll take you 38 minutes to charge from 10 to 80%. And it's a little bit of a shame because cars like the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and also the Kia EV6 can charge at nearly double the rate. But I will say from my past experience, the EV charging infrastructure rarely allows you to charge more than 150 kilowatts anyway. So this is a pretty respectable charging rate, but it's not bad, but it's also not fantastic either. Now in true BMW fashion, you double pull the hood latch and it reveals a very clean and tidy area under the hood, but also a front trunk or a frunk, which is great for storing any sort of charging cables or anything you want to keep hidden away. Now I'll be the first to admit that on paper and in pictures, I didn't really love the look of the BYD Seal, but looking at it now in this white metallic pearlescent paint, it looks really quite nice, and it looks really clean and simple with some nice aggressive elements like these daytime running lights and LED lights, and also this really cool lighting around the grills down here, which feed into actually a side air intake to help with air smoothing. So it looks really quite fancy. Now you get 19-inch wheels with these plastic inserts to help with aerodynamics, but they are actually alloy wheels. But in here are a set of cross-drilled and ventilated brakes, which is pretty hardcore for an electric car. Now we have this bit of an ugly side piece here. I'm not the biggest fan of this trim piece that says BYD design on the side. Here on the side mirror, there's an NFC badge, which means if you have the key card that comes with your BYD, you can tap it here and lock it and unlock it, and you don't have to carry a key with you at all. And things are kept pretty simple back here. There are 2 BYD badges. For some reason, you've got to call it the BYD Seal and also have a BYD badge here at the back. We have our little camera for our 360-degree parking camera system. We have this very aggressive rear bumper design, but we do have fake vents along the side here. So if that annoys you, yes, you do get fake vents on this EV. But just like a Tesla Model 3, we have a glass roof and also a rear glass here with no windshield wiper. And when you open the rear boot, it's actually a trunk design and not a hatch design, just like a Tesla Model 3, but at least it's power operated just like a Tesla Model 3. Now the biggest benefit of having a trunk space instead of a hatch space is that it doesn't share the cabin space, which means that it's a lot quieter inside compared to a traditional hatch or even an SUV. Now what I found very impressive is that BYD have carpeted every single part of the boot, even up top on the roof side of it, which is insane. And a lot of cars don't go to that effort, but BYD have, which is very impressive. Backseat room is ridiculous back here. Look how much knee room I have. I have decent amounts of feet room. It's a flat load floor all the way through. I have air vents. I also have a USB Type A and a USB Type C port. I have nice soft materials here in the doors. I have a speaker and I have some small storage areas as well. I have plenty of storage behind the seat in front of me, and I just have a really relaxed seating position and even a tiny little window next to my head. I have BYD embossed into the headrest. You have a nice view out of this giant glass roof, and I even have an armrest here, but you cannot access the boot from here. The doors feel nice and heavy. The construction in here is incredible. I'm pressing on everything, and for the price point, it's really well built. Now, my biggest, I guess, gripe with some Chinese made cars is that the build quality isn't as good as it could be. And my quote was to all my friends that as soon as Chinese cars could handle build quality, they're gonna be pretty much unstoppable. And that's what this is. This is incredible. Experiencing it firsthand, how high quality all these materials are for the price point, this is really quite nice. You do have this suede type material on the doors, and also up here on the dashboard, we also have some air vents running across the top, and this vertical 15-inch screen where you see here. Now, of course, if you know anything about BYD, this screen can rotate. And now we have two wireless charging pads, just like a Tesla Model 3. We have a physical actual gear knob here, unlike a Tesla Model 3, which got rid of any sort of physical shifters. Instead, we have this shifter right here. We have a start-stop button. We have controls for our car all in this center area, which is great to see that we have physical controls for crucial parts of our car, like volume, drive mode, snow mode, and some driver assist, and also some climate controls. We have some cup holders here. We have a pretty decent sized center cubby here, and an okay glove box as well. And as you can see, my charging cable is attached to one of the USB ports underneath, and this is the storage area underneath. It is a bit awkward to access. I probably would have preferred seeing this more open, but again, saying that, it is very useful having this bridge to control vital elements of your car. We have a leather wrapped steering wheel, which has physical buttons on it. We have another display in front of us, which you can customize just a little bit, and it's got so much information on it, but this thing is just so impressive. We have a Dyne audio speaker system as well. And we have stitching up here on the dashboard, across the doors and the seats. This is just a really impressive interior. Now we have a telescopically adjustable steering wheel as well, so it's really easy to get comfortable in this car. And we also have a heads-up display. So I'm just really impressed with this car, but what's more impressive is this infotainment system. Now this is insane how responsive this screen is. Check it out. You have things like the BYD Assistant, which can do things like, hey, BYD, put down the windows, which is basically as good as Siri or even Google Assistant. You've also got phone, you've got radio, you've got music, you've also got your navigation, which actually works really well, and it's pretty much on par with something like Google Maps. You've also got Spotify directly integrated into the actual infotainment. Here you have Android Auto, Apple CarPlay. Apple CarPlay is pretty cool because check this out. When you connect it, it takes up the entire screen, which actually looks really quite nice. And as you can see here, it's not as responsive as the native operating system, but it's still really good. But you cannot rotate the screen while you're using Apple CarPlay. Now you've got a media center. You've also got this vehicle image thing, which is basically just your 360-degree camera, and you can get a 3D view of your car, which is pretty cool. And even if you indicate, it should show up, yep, here on the screen. And these cameras are really high definition, so they're great for parking. Now you've got also some utility tools here, things for disabling auto start and file manager and data monitors and stuff like that. You can upload images to this car. You've also got your settings here for everything that you need to control in your car. You've got smart charging, which basically is just about starting your charge times. You've also got your digital radio. You've got a user manual in here. You can change the theme and layout of your screen, which is pretty cool. You can also change your wallpaper here as well. And you can go to the BYD store to check out what sort of apps you might want to download to your screen. Now down here across the bottom, you do have your climate controls, which are really responsive and really easy to actually control, which is quite nice. And you can actually go ahead here, just like a Tesla, and control the air vents right here, which is pretty interesting. So you can do that, but you cannot pinch them together like you can in a Tesla. But you do have an air purification system on board, which is pretty cool. So you can go ahead and see the difference in particles from the outside of the car compared to what the inside of the car is like. Now down here, you've also got your most recent apps as well, just like a phone, which is pretty useful. And then here you've also got a split screen function, which is pretty cool. You can just turn off the screen as well into this standby mode. And so the vertical function of the screen really serves no purpose apart from giving you a bit more room for the passenger or maybe your knee here on the side, but that's really about it. I will say that when I'm sitting here with my hand on the steering wheel at 9 and 3, it does block a bit of the screen when it is in its horizontal position. So at least you can rotate it vertically to sort of fix that, which is kind of a really cool, unique feature. And if you bash it around like this, it doesn't slide around at all, which is quite useful. But of course, you don't really want to fill this up with anything because it might get blocked when you're rotating it. Now, unlike Tesla, you have to go to the aftermarket if you want a sunshade for your glass roof, because that doesn't have a shade like traditional big glass roofs have. And here is the solution that BYD gives you. They give you this sunshade, which is meant to sort of block out the sun to help keep the car cool. And that's a good thing because I found the aircon in this car to be a bit weak for even a hot day like today, which is around 31 degrees Celsius. And that big glass roof is still letting in a lot of heat, which means that cabin is getting pretty hot and the air conditioning is working extra hard. So at least you have a bit of a rudimentary solution here to fix that that's included with your car. So the BYD Seal is really nice when it's sitting still, but what's it like to drive? Simply wow. I've been spending a couple of hours in the new BYD Seal and I didn't know what to expect. I thought, you know, people were hyped up about it because of the price. They were happy to excuse things because of the price. But I can tell you now that this thing is one of the best electric cars on sale today. There's a lot of things that are going for it. That would be the suspension setup. This thing is ultra comfortable. It is really plush despite this having a big battery pack underneath it. It's really quite nice to ride around in and it's very quiet. Sound insulation is very good. Build quality is just quite impressive again. All the stuff in here just feels nice and high quality, feels well constructed, and it's like BYD sat down, had a meeting and said, okay, we're going to appeal to the Western markets and they have a high standard of how a car should be built. Now, how should we go about that? And it's like they reverse engineered some luxury cars and went ahead and figured out how to make sure things were buttoned down well and just felt and looked nice. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the steering wheel center airbag thing. It's just a bit scratchy plastic and a huge plastic BYD logo in the middle, but the outside of it is very nice to touch and feel and feels great in the hand. It's also telescopically adjustable, so I'm easy to get nice and comfortable here. This giant screen that's in front of me is rotatable, which is a cool novelty, but also just makes this interior feel just a little bit different. And you've also got a great responsiveness through here as well. We have a physical gear shifter, physical start-stop button. All this interaction I have with the car is all very positive. Now, cornering in this thing, it just feels like it's stuck to the ground, and that rear motor, rear drive setup is really well executed. Now, we're not getting a really fast 0 to 100 time. It's only 5.9 seconds in this premium model. If you want a faster time, you'll have to go and get the BYD Seal Performance, and that will give you a 0 to 100 time of 3.8 seconds. But this is a respectable amount of power. There's over 200 kilowatts here, 360 newton meters of torque. It's enough. It's enough to blast off from a set of lights when you're in sport mode, but then you can dial it back into normal and eco mode. So eco mode just kills the power, normal mode sort of dulls the power into a normal range, and the sport gives you everything. Now, in terms of visibility here, it's really quite nice, really easy to look out, really easy to get comfortable in here. The features in here are amazing as well, like the BYD voice assistant's really good, so you don't really have to touch things in the screen. You can just use that to turn on functions of this car, which I just find incredible because I've really never liked voice assistants, but this is the first one that I've interacted with and gone, that's really quite nice to use. Now, Tesla has something similar, but this one just feels really native, I guess. It feels like I'm using a Google or Alexa assistant that works really well. Now, the braking in here is actually pretty good too. It's got a bit of a sponge to it, and then you sort of dig into it and it stops nice and abruptly and with some good urgency too. But the thing to note is that, yes, you have a couple of different braking modes. You have comfort braking and sport braking. You also have a sport feel and a comfort feel for your steering. That's as much as driving adjustment goes, drive modes, and those two things you can change. Now, when I'm driving along here, I can get some harder bumps translated through the cabin a bit, they sound a bit more harsh, but they're not too bad. Even riding on these larger 19-inch wheels, you still have a nice amount of meat around the outside of the tire, which is great for just being able to sort of cruise over some coarser sections of road. Having actual indicator stalks and wiper stalks is great too. Now, that seems like a novelty to bring up, but yes, Tesla has gotten rid of these things and these physical touch points in the car, which just make it a little less easy to learn. Now, once you learn it, it's actually not too bad, but I do like having these traditional touch points inside this car. Now, I have 65% of charge left, which is indicating that I have 396 kilometers of range here in sport mode. And that is an incredible amount of range. And like I mentioned, you can get well over 600 kilometers of range according to that evdatabase.org when you're driving in the city in mild temperatures. Now, in colder climates, that's when this battery does suffer, just like every other electric car. But driving around this thing, it doesn't really give me any range anxiety at all. I've been driving outside of the main Sydney CBD to do this filming, and now I'm driving back in, and I feel like I'm absolutely fine. And it's just something that's nice and easy to live with. It doesn't feel like a range restricted EV in any single way. Now, one of the biggest complaints that people have with this car is the nagging ADAS system. So it's the driver assistance systems. And yes, it can be annoying because it has an automatic speed sign recognition system where it will pick up a road sign, tell you that it's a 60 zone, and it will start binging at you if you're driving over that speed limit, for example. The thing is though, it's not always accurate. It might pick up the back of a bus, which has a 40 zone sticker on the back of it, so it might think you're driving through a 40 km/h zone when actually you're driving in a higher speed limit area, and it will start getting cranky at you. So you go to turn that off in the screen, easy to do, but then the problem is that it turns itself back on every time you turn this car on and off. So I'm all for safety systems. That's great for people who want them, but I do think that all things should be able to be turned off once, and once only in a car, and turned back on if you really need it. Now, right now, I'm about to drive into the thick of peak hour traffic, and that is on purpose because yes, while this electric car is nice to drive and it's impressive, it's more important to know what this thing is like to drive in traffic. How does the radar cruise system work? How does it feel just to sit in the seat for a long period of time? And that's what I'm doing right now. And the cool thing with electric cars, if you need a reminder in any single way, is that when you're in traffic, you use less range, which is always a good thing, and you're not burning petrol like you would in a petrol car, for example, which actually burns more when it's sitting still. Now, visibility out the back is a little bit limited, but you do have a quick button to your cameras, which is great as a physical button here on the steering wheel. Now, mid-range acceleration is ridiculous. This thing just picks up, and you'd think a measly 360 newton meters of torque wouldn't really do much, but because it's all instant, it just goes so much further, and this car feels dynamic. It feels like it wants to be driven, which is really quite nice, and it feels great to drive as well. And it's one of those things that I would highly recommend you go out and test drive alongside a Tesla Model 3. My default recommendation for EVs is Tesla Model 3 because you have access mainly to all those superchargers, and then once you're driving it and living with it, you realize it's nice to interact with a bit of technology inside your car rather than being stuck with some age-old infotainment systems that some other EVs come with from traditional auto manufacturers. Now, BYD has a good mix of both. So if you want some traditional elements here and there, but you want a nice flashy screen, this is exactly what it gives you. It feels like it gives you a mix of the past and the future in a good way. Now, I would like to see where this infotainment goes in the future and what features they include, because right now just having Spotify is fine, but being able to include things like video streaming and all that would be amazing, especially when electric cars require you to sit up to 40 minutes at a charger if you're going from 10 to 80%, for example. Now, this car's been averaging around 16 kilowatt hours across some decent highway driving and also plenty of back road driving with start-stop. That is quite impressive, and that just means that you're going to be able to get a little bit more out of your car than normal. Now, the cumulative consumption of this car has been 16 kilowatts per 100 kilometers, which is very efficient considering we've been on the highway. And I've been in some EVs that once you get to highway driving, it really pushes that consumption closer to 20 kilowatts per 100 kilometers. So that is very impressive. Now, I am noticing some noise intrusion from the rear doors. Maybe they're not as well sound deadened as the front because I'm hearing a van behind me that's quite loud, and it sort of feels like it's bleeding in a little from the rear doors. But in terms of rattles and squeaks in here, I've had none. It's really impressive, the build quality in here. Now, it could be because this might be a media car, and so they might have flagged that as such. Now, as we speed up here into an 80 km/h zone, we're going to test out a very exciting test, which is radar cruise control. It's not that exciting, but it's pretty easy to operate. There's a simple button here which jumps you straight into it, and it's got lane keep assist. You've got easy buttons to access your distance and all that. It's really easy to use. And look, here at 80 km/h, I can have a very quiet conversation here. Also, something to note, Phone calls in here are crispy clear. People really can hear you nice and well in here, which is awesome. Music sounds good thanks to this Dyne audio speaker system. Now, the BYD, and it doesn't charge as fast as it could compared to some competitors, but that's all stuff that can improve with time. And so if you're looking for a proper alternative with a great infotainment system, really good features, a pretty decent drivetrain, but more importantly, a great driving range, well, the BYD Seal is one of the best, if not the single best alternative to a Tesla Model 3 if you're happy to jump into a brand you haven't really heard of before.